I'm Joni Patry, and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'd like to talk about the loss of comedian Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis was probably one of the most iconic comedians of our time. In the 60s, I remember so many of his movies, and prior to that, he had an act with Dean Martin that will never be forgotten. It was just the bringing together of two completely different people that somehow the chemistry worked and it was great. So we're going to talk about his chart in terms of what we look for comedians. And don't forget, Jerry Lewis is not only just known for being a comedian and being an entertainer, being an actor. He was a humanitarian that rivaled hardly anyone, because for 44 years he would host telethons every Labor Day for hours to raise money for muscular dystrophy. And I remember he was always giving his whole heart and soul to truly give back to the world and help others. This was how I remember Jerry Lewis. Jerry Lewis just passed away in the month of August 20th, 2017. So many times when we think about comedians, so many times their life has a certain degree of torment, and because they're making light of things or making things funny to sort of like get the attention that they wouldn't get any other way, and to forget their problems, their troubles. So this is part of many comedians that have difficult lives. I don't think that this was so much a part of Jerry's life, but looking at his chart, there are something to be said about this, because I'm seeing some great difficulty by so many planets that he has in his 8th house. So let's take a look at his chart. Jerry Lewis was born March 16th, 1926, and the time that we're using is 12:15 p.m. in Newark, New Jersey. And with this, Jerry Lewis has Gemini as his ascendant. Of course he's got Gemini as his ascendant. When I think of comedians, I think of, where is their Mercury? Mercury is the planet that deals with communications, always thinking ahead of others. But remember, in Greek mythology, Mercury is the trickster. So he's the one that is always pulling pranks, tricks, and deceiving people. But that's exactly what humor is. And to be funny, I always say you got to always be thinking ahead of other people, because you got to be quick-witted, you got to be fast, you got to be ahead of the game to be funny. And to do improv, which is incredibly hard to do, you got to be just on it. You got to be where you're spontaneous and thinking fast to think of how these things can be looked at in a different, unusual, and unique way. And you'll see this with Jerry's chart. Why? Because his Mercury, which rules Gemini, Mercury rules Gemini, goes to his 10th house, and it's with Uranus and the Sun. Uranus is that spontaneity, unpredictable, things that just happen when you least expect it. So this is a part of his humor and how he just came together. And you know, he and Dean Martin, they were known for improv that never anybody ever did before they came together, and they didn't need the scripts. They just fed off of each other, and they came up with these hilarious acts that nobody's ever done this before. This is the Uranus conjunct Mercury. And notice that the Sun is exactly conjunct Uranus. And this is kind of revolutionary. This is unconventional. This is spontaneous. In the 10th house. This is his work. This is his career. And notice that the sun rules the 3rd house. The sun rules Leo. Leo's on the 3rd house. So the ruler of the 3rd house goes to the 10th house. Now let me tell you something about the 3rd house. It deals with, besides courage, because you have to be courage to get out on a stage and do this in the first place, but it rules entertainment. The 3rd house is all about communications and entertainment. And if you consider this, the 3rd house is relative to the 3rd sign, which is Gemini, which is ruled by Mercury. So the fact that Mercury is conjunct the planet that rules the 3rd house and Uranus is there, you see the spontaneity and the genius that he possesses with his humor. Now, Mercury is not known to do so well in the sign of Pisces. But you know, when I think of people with Mercury in Pisces being debilitated, I think of people who think outside the box, who are not the norm. They're unconventional in their thinking as well. So they're not going to think like everyone else. As a matter of fact, consider this. Albert Einstein has debilitated Mercury in the 10th house, ruler of his chart, because he has Gemini ascendant as well. So you cannot say that these two individuals are not bright. They think differently than others. They're quite unique. So talking about the problems, talking about the disgrace, humiliation that Jerry must have felt, particularly being raised as a child. He has all of these 8th house planets. There had to be some kind of humiliation and problems growing up. Both his parents were entertainers, so they could not have been there because entertainers always work nightclubs at night, so they weren't around. And Jerry actually dropped out of school when he was 16 to go into show business. And he wasn't always all that successful. And he almost quit right before he made it big. Isn't that the case with most people? But if we will analyze the planets in his 8th house, he has Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and K2, all in Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is very much into business. So this was a businessman. It was important to him to be successful. But if you will notice, Mars is exalted in Capricorn. Very, very interesting. So Mars in Capricorn being powerful could make things a little bit more difficult for 8th house matters. But Mars being exalted in Capricorn in the 8th house does make him an incredibly deep thinker, profound, like a scientist. And not to draw another analogy or comparison, but Albert Einstein does have Mars exalted in Capricorn in the 8th house, but his is with Rahu, Jerry Lewis's is with K2. Very different. But it does indicate that these are deep thinkers. And you know what's interesting? A lot of people that knew Jerry Lewis said it was amazing how serious he was in his real life because he was so goofy and silly in his comedic role, but it was nothing like the way he really was in his real life. And if you will notice, Saturn in his 6th house, the 6th house deals with health and healing, is in Scorpio, which note that Saturn in Scorpio is in Mars sign, is in Parivartana with Mars because Mars is in Saturn's sign and Saturn's in Mars sign. So look at that. When you look at Mars, it's in Capricorn, ruled by Saturn, and Saturn's in Scorpio, ruled by Mars. This is mutual reception, parivartana, and it empowers these two planets between the 6th and the 8th house. And I think this is one of the major indications of Jerry Lewis being a humanitarian by this Saturn in the 6th house of work and service and helping others. And the fact that Mars disposits from Saturn to the 8th house. This is his will and need to help heal disease as he works so tirelessly with his projects to raise millions of dollars for muscular dystrophy. This is the connection. And another thing I might add, Jerry Lewis lived a very long life. He was 91 years old when he died. And when you look at length of life, you're generally looking at the 8th house and the 3rd house. In Vedic astrology, these are the houses that you determine how long someone should possibly live. So his 8th house, which is 4 planets, if you call K2 a planet, there, Mars is so strong. But I believe it's this parivartana that the ruler of the 8th goes to the 6th and they exchange very powerfully. This gave him his length of life. And the other house that you look at in terms of length of life is the 3rd house, because the 3rd house deals with our courage, our life force. And the ruler of the 3rd house, being the sun, is so powerfully placed in the 10th house. And Jerry Lewis was sick. He had a lot of disease throughout his life, but he survived it all. It's quite amazing that this man lived till 91 years old. He overcame so many things. So looking at all these planets in the 8th house, you would think, how was he so successful? People do not equate the 8th house with success generally. Yes, the 8th house can mean money through other people. It can represent lots of money many times, but generally there's struggles with the 8th house. So the thing that I noted, there's many things of why Jerry Lewis was such a success and why he became a very, very wealthy man, is looking at his chart. Notice that those planets in the 8th house, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, K2, go to the 10th house, counting from the moon. You always must look at planets' placements from the moon. This is called Chandra Lagna. Very important when assessing a chart. You'll miss some of the major things if you don't look from the moon, because a chart plays out both through our mind and emotions through the moon, as well as from the ascendant, which is based on our time of birth. Rahu also is in the 2nd house. The 2nd house is our ability to make money. And Rahu is extremes and it's empowering. But also notice, and the 2nd house not only dealing with money, deals with our voice, and this is how he made his money. But Rahu is in the sign of Cancer, and Cancer rules the 2nd house. So the moon rules the 2nd house, and the 2nd house ruler, the moon, goes to the 11th house of great gains. Whenever you have a connection between the 2nd and the 11th house, this is called a Dana Yoga. Dana means wealth producing. So the ruler of the 2nd and the 11th, great wealth. Plus all these planets reside in the 10th house from the moon. Very, very auspicious. So another thing to be noted to denote his success in the 2nd part of his life is by looking at his Navamsha chart. The Navamsha chart is the D9 chart. It represents the fruit of the tree. So in other words, what the Navamsha chart will tell us, will what's promised in the birth chart produce its effects in life, and will give the effects of the 2nd part of life. So going to his D9 chart, notice that he has Aries as his ascendant, and notice all of the planets in his third house of entertainment. He's got Rahu, Venus, Sun, Uranus, Saturn, Jupiter. Now, what I find fascinating about this is his Jupiter from his birth chart is in Capricorn. And whenever you see a planet that goes from its debilitation sign, which Jupiter is debilitated, in his 8th house in his birth chart by being in Capricorn, whenever you see it go to its exaltation sign in the Navamsha, you know that this individual is going to come into greatness, okay? And looking at this, an exalted Jupiter with Rahu and the Sun in the 3rd house of entertainment, this is his rise to glory. It is predicted through the Navamsha that he came into this great success. And another thing I might add about when planets are in Cancer, ruled by the moon gives the ability to memorize and to mimic things. And people usually have a strong moon in order to remember lines, to be actors, actresses. They have to have a great memory. And note as well, his moon is in Gemini. Gemini is the sign of the comedian because of Mercury, because it's relative to the 3rd house being the 3rd sign. So you're going to find that within his Navamsha gives the total results of his success in his life, and that he was an iconic entertainer. So I'd like to look at the end of his life and the dashas and the transiting planets that were active towards the end of his life. He was in the Mahadasha of Saturn and Bhukti moon. So Saturn moon. And if you will look at his chart, the Saturn moon from his birth chart, counting from Saturn to the moon, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. The moon goes 6 placements from Saturn. And because of that, this represents ill health, problems around health matters, and fluctuations in his health, the moon. But notice that the moon rules his 2nd house. When people pass, when people die, generally, not always, but generally they will be in a dasha of a Marika planet. The Marika planets are the planets that rule either or both. They rule the 2nd and the 7th house. So his Marikas, because looking at his birth chart, Cancer is on his 2nd house. His Marika is the moon, and Jupiter rules his 7th house. So his other Marika planet is Jupiter. So, but he was in, and Marika means killer, by the way, and it does denote death in a chart. So the fact that he was in a Marika Bhukti is very important. And when people get very old and weak, that generally can be the time that they can go. He had just experienced his 3rd Saturn return. By the time of 90, Saturn takes 30 years to go through the zodiac. So this was he had just gone through his 3rd Saturn return. And notice where transiting Saturn is in Scorpio. It is aspecting all of his 8th house planets, Jupiter, Venus, Mars, and Ketu. This is Saturn's aspecting by its 3rd full Vedic aspect from Scorpio to Capricorn, full aspect onto these 8th house planets. And if you'll note, there was a total solar eclipse on August 21st, and he passed on August 20th. So this eclipse had a profound effect on him because Rahu and Ketu had just changed, this is by their mean node, into, Rahu shifted into Cancer and Ketu shifted into Capricorn. Therefore, they started activating the 8th house and the 2nd house. 2nd house Marika, 8th house death. So you had Ketu coming together into the 8th house, and for most of all, he has a nodal return of the nodes coming back together, and they're activating. Ketu is approaching his K2 for a return, Jupiter, Venus, and Mars. Very, very difficult time for someone that is up in age like that. So this was in due part of what caused his timing for his passing. But I just want to say, as Jerry Lewis left this world, some of the great things that he did for humanity and society was his ability, his great talent that he gave to us, his great abilities to make us all laugh and to help and heal the human condition through all of his work of giving back to the world and community. It was always about helping others. So with that, I'd like to close and give my regards to this great, great loss that we've all experienced from this incredible man that's graced our planet. So thank you. If you would like to learn more about my work, you can always go to my website, which is galacticcenter.org. If you would like to learn more about Vedic astrology, I have a university, which is University of Vedic Astrology.com, and you can read the transcripts about Jerry Lewis's chart by going to my magazine, which is astrologicmagazine.com. Thank you.